Shabbat, Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, Shalom. Shabbat, 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 Shalom. Bim, bam, bim, 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 bam. Bim, 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 bam. Bim, bam, bim, 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 bam. Bim, 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 bam. Good Shabbos.
Good Shabbos, everyone. Good Shabbos to those who are here in the sanctuary and those who are with us online. And as we talked about in advance of services, tonight's service will conclude after our prayers with a discussion about Israel, about what it means to be a Zionist in the progressive-minded framework of the Reform movement for us and what that represents and our feelings about Israel today. And you'll hear from us rabbis, and we'll be curious your thoughts, your questions. We'll actually drop a Zoom link onto the YouTube link later in the service so that you can zoom in and converse with us live rather than just type in your questions. Or you can just watch online as well as you're doing right now. And for those in the sanctuary, you'll be able to engage us, or even John asked additional Tish questions at the end of services, as is always the case. And if you're watching or here in person, greet one another. Wish each other a good Shabbos. It's a CAYA service, a relaxed service, a service where we're not going to formally use a prayer book, but you can always pick up that prayer book, an opportunity to meditate, to reflect, to just connect with one another. It's nice that so many of us are here online and in person, finding a way, even in the midst of Omicron, to have a Shabbat moment, to sort of put the stress aside and realize we can sit in person if we're comfortable in the sanctuary in a safe way, safely distanced as we all are here, or in our homes, sit on our couch. I see some of you who I imagine have a glass of wine by your side as well. Jealous, but that's okay, we'll have ours later. Maybe we'll have a new resolution that Cantor and me, Rabbi, get ours on the bima. Only white wine, though, on the bima, of course. But I digress. Let's give ourselves a moment for Shabbat. Let's give ourselves some time. You know, as we begin our breath, I like to start with the lighting of the Shabbos candles and use that light as a metaphor for ourselves as we bring light into our world. You know, you've heard me tell the story, or Rabbi tell the story, on Shabbos morning, on Friday morning, as we get ready for Shabbat with our preschoolers, we give each child their own Shabbat candle every Friday, so that it reminds them as they repeat like a mantra that they bring more light into our world. Each of us brings more light into our world. So as we kindle the Shabbos candles, let's remember that as well.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu להדליק נר של שבת.
And so as we begin Shabbat, let's continue to look at those candles, to look at the flame, to notice that which it brings into our world. And the idea of how we illuminate our lives by giving ourselves a moment in time. The light that we create from within is emulated by the light that we kindle with our Shabbos candles. Now we're told in two different ways. The Shabbat is there for us to remember the story of creation and how after 6 days God rested, and so we do the same. We let go for a little bit. We let go of the control of our world and connect with it a little differently. But we're also told that we have Shabbat because when we were slaves in the land of Egypt, we were not allowed to have that moment of rest. The ultimate freedom is to let go, and so we celebrate freedom with the moment of Shabbat as well. But the reality is that Shabbat can be something unique, different for each and every one of us. So maybe close your eyes, or maybe look at the candles, but at least take a very deep breath in this moment now. Breathe in God's gift to each and every one of us. Breathe out our gift to this world. Because you've given yourself a gift in this time, in this moment of Shabbat, this peacefulness that we create. So many miss the opportunity as we get bogged down in the challenges, the frustrations, the difficulties that are there and still remain. But consciously, by bringing ourselves to the synagogue, by logging on, by noticing, by kindling the candles, by sipping the wine, the sweetness of this day, we make this moment our peace, our calm, our goodness that we know, that we feel, that we bring to our world. As we pray tonight, as we sing the melodies together, just keep reflecting on the light this moment brings to our life. The warmth on a cold winter night that we feel in connecting, in community, in melody, in prayer, in kindness, part of something greater than ourselves. And the reality that a Jew, wherever we might find ourselves, anyone who connects with the Jewish community here, anywhere in this country, anywhere on the globe, might take this moment in the same way as a gift on Shabbat. And how precious that is. How important that is, how much of a blessing that is. The connections we feel that move beyond our own community, our own congregation, our own homes, those invisible lines of connections connecting us all the way to our home of Jerusalem, the eternal home of the Jewish people. Radiance it gives into our life, into our days, and the beauty that it can be for us as well. so now, as we prepared ourselves for our prayers, so can we join in our call to worship, the Baruch Hu? And if you'd like to rise, we can as well, whether we're here or at home, and join in our call to worship.
בכל לבבך ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבניך ודיברת בם בשבתך בביתך ובלכתך בדרך ובשוכבך ובקומך, וקשרתם לאות על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בין עיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך, למען תזכרו ועשיתם את כל מצוותיי, והייתם קדושים לאלוהיכם. אני אדוני אלוהיכם, אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים, להיות לכם לאלוהים, Ani Adonai Elohechem.
Those words we just sang with Cantor, Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul. It's a wonderful reminder for us of a number of different things. One being that concept, that idea, that word, ahava, love. We're told in that prayer that we show that love for God in a number of different ways. In some ways, it's by teaching our children about our traditions. In some ways, it's about doing things, like putting a mezuzah on the doorpost of our home. So as you walk into your home, as you walk out of your house, it's a reminder of who we are, the values that we have as a people. There's a tradition that's in those words as well of laying tefillin, of putting phylacteries on other boxes. There's a physical reminder of that love that we have as well. But it's that concept that's in there of loving God that really extends to the way that we should live our lives. Because love, as we experience it, really adds so much dimension to our lives. Whether it's by showing it for others or being on the receiving end. So just for a moment, I invite you to close your eyes again. To focus on that word. To repeat it to yourself. Ahava. Love. Ahava. Love. Think for yourself of a time that you felt loved. Think of the person who shared or shares that love with you. How did you know? How was that expressed? How did you feel that love? There's two other prayers as part of our liturgy, Ahava Rabbah and Ahavat Olam, that talk about the way that God showed God's love for us. It's by giving us gifts. The gift of Torah, of our tradition, of our rituals. And think for yourself, how do you show your love to others? How do you bring that emotion, that feeling into our world? How do you express your love to family, to friends, to your community? Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, we're commanded, love your neighbor as yourself. Before we can do that, we have to understand, how do we show ourselves that love as well? How do we take care of ourselves? Do for ourselves those things that we'd want others to do for us as well, or that we should do for others. Ahava, love. As we think about those images in our mind of how we felt it, how we've shared it, our hope is that we can bring more of it into our world. We can share it. Make our world a little brighter because of it. In order to do that, we have this next prayer, the words of the Hashkivenu, which is a prayer that asks that as we go to sleep tonight, that tomorrow morning we wake up to life renewed, refreshed, ready to fulfill our mission and maybe to share a little bit more ahava, to share a little bit of love.
Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Hamidenu Malkeinu L'chaim Ufros Aleinu Sukkot Shlomecha Hashkivenu Adonai Eloheinu Hashkivenu L'shalom. Let there be love and understanding among us. Let peace and friendship be our shelter from life's storms. Be our shelter from life's storms. Be our shelter from life's storms.
In preparation for the Amidah, we rise together now and take a moment for our own private meditations, following the prayers of our hearts, or if you've got a prayer book in front of you and want to flip to somewhere around page 24 or 25, there's a guided meditation in there as well. Please rise.
The thought has blown the marketplace away. There is a song on the wind and joy in the trees. Shabbat has arrived in the world, scattering the song in the silence of the night. And eternity utters a day. Eternity utters a day. Has blown the marketplace away. There is a song on the wind and joy in the trees. Shabbat has arrived in the world, scattering the song in the silence of the night. And eternity eternity utters a day. תפתח ופי אגיד תהילתך. Eternal God, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your glory. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, ve'Elohei avoteinu ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak, ve'Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Leah, ve'Elohei Rachel. האל הגדול, הגיבור והנורא, אל עליון, גומל חסדים טובים, וקונה הכל, וזוכר חסדי אבות ואימהות, ומביא גאולה לבני בניהם, למען שמו באהבה. מלך עוזר ומושיע ומגן, ברוך אתה אדוני, מגן אברהם ועזרת שרה. אתה גיבור לעולם אדוני, מחיי הכל אתה רב להושיע, משיב הרוח ומוריד הגשם. מכלכל חיים בחסד, מחיי הכל ברחמים רבים, סומך נופלים ורופא חולים, ומתיר אסורים, ומקיים אמונתו לשני עפר. מי כמוך בעל גבורות, ומי דומה לך, מלך ממית ומחיה, ומצמיח ישוע, ונאמן אתה להחיות הכל. ברוך אתה אדוני, מחיי הכל. אתה קדוש ושמך קדוש, וקדושים בכל יום יהללוך סלה. ברוך אתה אדוני, האל הקדוש.
The presence of Torah being Shabbat as we bring Torah into our midst as a community, and at a time when we come together, so are our prayers of healing so important. As we think of those in need of strength, in need of healing, both physically and emotionally. And so we mention names out loud, we reach out, we touch Torah, we connect with one another, bring strength in the knowledge we have of those who are in need, and reach out to them. And we help each other as a congregation, as a family. Mishaberach Avotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov v'Imotenu Sarav Kalei Avrachel. Hu Yivarech et Cholim, merciful God who's blessed our ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Leah, and Rachel. Send your blessings to our loved ones who are stricken with illness and anxiety, those friends and family we think of at this time. Ilis Ioto and Will Armston, Marcia Burchad, Doreen Billett, Michael Brody, Larry Burke, Karen Kasman, Patty Seresny, Michael Eisen, Barbara Esrig, Sandy Flair, Richard Gotro, Susan Goodman Wagner, Batia Basha Panina, Chaim and Gidon Varachel, Chana Bat Yom Tov Rivka, Ty Hall, Andrew Halo, Hank Heiser, Jerry Hoffman, Leslie Hubert, Jane Jacobs, Myrna Klein, Serafina Coffrin, Sarah Bat Miriam, Karen Coltoneau, Rick Cornspan, Marta Lazar, Glenn Lee, Henry Leopold, Haley Lipman, Libby McIntyre, Zoe Marcus, Joyce Maza, Len Meiji, Teresa Meiji, Allison Mertzman, Gail Mintz, Sid Mintz, Lev Herschel ben Bat Ami, Perry Moss, Lori Moss, Moshe ben Moshe, Scott Miles, Rabbi Robert Nosenchuk, Razel Bat Leah Miriam, Leah Elisheva Bat Avram Vachana, Casey Pearson, Annette Pines, Eileen Percelli, Melanie Pohl, James Raftery, Joanne Reed, Lydia Rofel, the St. Amand family, Rita Seidman, Danny Shepard, Bernard Sklar, Roberta Sonino, Barbara Storm, Madeline Taylor, Naomi White, Helene Wolf, all those who are battling the coronavirus. The 32,455 American troops have been injured in Iraq, the surrounding areas to date, and all those we hold in our hearts. Baruch atah Na'arfel Chalim. Bless you, God, who gives strength to those in need.
לתת גדולה ליוצא בראשית, שלא עשנו כגויי הארצות, ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונם, ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא, ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ. ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
The mystics teach us that the Kaddish has different meanings every time it is recited. In their minds, it is a prayer that links earth to heaven and bridges the chasm between the living and the dead. The Kaddish is the assurance that the soul is enduring and the human spirit is indestructible. It is a prayer that permits a child to remember a parent and a parent to remember a child. It is an opportunity to bind wounds and bring generation closer to generation. In light and in darkness, it is all of these and more, for it is our people's memory of the best that life has to offer. So on this Shabbat, we think of those friends and family who have been taken from us in these most recent days. Ushiva, Shloshim, and Shana we mark. Michael Resnick, David Kahan, Clara Bayev, Jerry Levine, Fran Mirsky, Shalom Nir, Armand Mazius, Nat Fishman, Helen Indianer, Jerry Sturman, Denise Chakran, Luba Grundy, Josephine Horowitz, Sharon Lansky-Loy, Norma Elkanen, Kalman Egol, Sheldon Davis, Eugene Goretta, Jan Brody, the 4,586 Americans of our armed forces who have been killed in Iraq and the surrounding areas to date, and the 848,051 Americans who have lost their lives to the coronavirus. And to their names we add those whose yard sites we mark, those of whose anniversary of passing we lovingly commemorate. Irene Alazam, Ira Balin, Saul Seresny, Buddy Cohen, Janet Feldman, Marshall Fruman, Miep Gies, Edith Ginsburg Silverman, Stella Himmelstein, Dolores Heinz, Samuel Zalman Hirschman, Rhoda Itzkovitz, Jerry Kushner, Michael Ledger, Annalisa Litzbarski, Marvin Magar, Morton Malone, Harry Miller, Jesse Poland, Kate Romanek, Jack Rowans, Ida Sanders, Sonia Sermon, Larry Singer, Noreen Solomon, Samuel Yellen, along with all the names in our hearts, and those who have no one to say Kaddish for them, do we join together as one family, as one community, in the immortal words of the Mourner's Kaddish is found on page 46 in our prayer books. Yitgadal v'yitkadash shemei Rabbah, Be'almad divrach cherutei v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayachon u'v'yomachon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mivarach le'olam omei omaya, yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh, V'yitadar, v'yitalev, v'yitalal, shmei d'kudusha, b'richu. Le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbachata v'nechamata, da'amiran de'alma v'imru. Amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu ya'aseh shalom. Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru. Amen. May the source of peace and peace to all who mourn. Comfort to all the bereaved among us here and everywhere. As together we say, Amen.
Oseh shalom b'mramav, hu yaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael.
Format. Good Shabbos, everyone.
Good Shabbos, Rabbi, and everyone.
Trying something a little bit different here. We'll make it a little less formal. We'll come down and have a conversation with each other and with all of you, and with those online too. And I can't speak, the first challenge that we have in a discussion about Israel. We've dropped a YouTube link into the a Zoom link into the YouTube page. Those of you in the congregation right now don't have to worry about that. You can see those who log on. And just a way to engage people a little bit differently. Look, everything we try at Temple is something new. And as we always say, you know, making the old new and the new holy, or the new, yeah, that too. And finding ways to connect. And as much as we've been doing this now for 23 months, it still feels really different. And it's amazing when you look out to the congregation, and honestly, those of you online should know, as we look out and see a dozen people who join us for services, and you think, wow, what a great crowd tonight. It's a new perspective. So it's nice to be able to do that. And we have a great crowd online with us, with 40 screens on YouTube, and I saw on Facebook there are, 20 or so on each of our Facebook pages. So it's nice. So hopefully, talking about Israel and why be a Zionist, how to be a Zionist, what our favorite place in Israel is something of interest and something you want to talk about for a few minutes with us. And that's why we wanted to have that conversation. You all know that Israel is a priority and important, and that relationship means the world to Rabbi and me, and why we go so often. But it may be for different reasons. And so we want to talk about, and to start with, our favorite places in Israel that mean the most to us, and then from there sort of evolve into our conversation about Zionism and what it means to be a Zionist today, and why that's a good word and a word that we're proud to use in the context of, my tagline, our taglines. So who gets to go first?
Up to you.
Age before beauty? Is that how it works? So, well, Rabbi and I were talking beforehand, and the idea of why we have many places that are our favorite places in Israel. And I'm curious, just quick answers from the congregation, those who are here or those online. So, Richard, you went to Israel with me. The Lakins been to Israel a lot of different times. The Ebers were there recently. Your favorite place? Masada. Going up Masada, because? Cool. So history, the view, desert, the story of Masada, the heroism involved, all of that as well. Putting people on the spot here. Thank you. Richard? Har Herzl outside Jerusalem? Was it because, so Har Herzl is the military cemetery, the national cemetery in Israel, where all the prime ministers are buried. Herzl's remains are brought there after the creation of the state, as well as soldiers are buried there too. And the power of youth in there, and seeing the young lives that were lost in the sustaining of Israel and the security of Israel. George or Celia? You were born in Palestine. Not to give away your age, but just saying. But in the biblical Israel, yes, you were born. So where's your favorite place of Israel? Being with family? Is that, I think maybe
I can resonate with that.
I said to Rabbi, I said, your favorite place is your is grandma's kitchen.
Yeah. Absolutely.
For me, I answer it with two different places, though I have many, many places that I love in Israel. But, the most obvious is Jerusalem. And I lived in Jerusalem for a year of rabbinical school, right? And so that's where our campus is, and we have to find our apartment there. And so that personal connection, but it's the history. It's, learning about King David in the Bible and reading stories of David and Bathsheba when David looks across the Silwan Valley and sees this young woman bathing on her rooftop. It sounds fabricated. And being at the city of David and looking across the valley and saying, wow, that's not that far. It's like me looking to that door there, and it's realistic. And suddenly what might be seen as a fable in the Bible became a reality, a real story. And King David was here and walking that land, and the power of that our Bible is our memory, but there's history of us as a people there and the importance of that. And I remember, the most beautiful Yom Kippur sitting on the rooftop of our campus, meditating as, the sun was setting at the end of the day, preparing for Nila before I went back into services, and just the beauty overlooking the old city. And again, how many Jews have experienced that for hundreds, if not thousands of years. As well as, the vibrancy of Jerusalem today. And I think of my first teen mission in 1996. taking kids to Israel. And back then we would do a first week, we had a 5-week trip. The first week was in Jerusalem. The last week was in Jerusalem. Great bookends of a trip. You see the ancient Jerusalem, you start, and then you finish with the modern Jerusalem. And we got back to Israel, and it was after all these intense hikes and exhausting camping out experiences. And a little boy, who was 16, said to me as we pulled back into Jerusalem, and we're getting off the bus, he said, "I feel like I'm back home." And I always feel that way when I go back to Jerusalem, and that it's back home. And I dream one day of having a home in Jerusalem. If I were to live in Israel, I'd live in Jerusalem. It's just my connection there with the ancient and the modern. And since Rabbi's having a conversation over there,
well, you had your second place that you're
okay.
that you're stealing from me as we go through too. I mean, you took the first place. You're going to take the second one.
Well, my second place, and I was also reflecting earlier, Brian and I were talking earlier about, remember when our kids were that young, and like my daughter would come with me to services. The boys I couldn't do because they couldn't stay still. That would be like torture for all of you, but my daughter would just sit there, right, Cantor, and enjoy. So this other area, I love the desert. So near Masada, but not Masada itself, just hiking in the Negev, being in the desert of Israel, for two reasons again. One, I love the natural, the topography. I love the being in that climate, the experience of it, being able to know our ancestors walked here. Again, looking at stars. I tell kids when we're camping out, Rabbi says I'm taking from him. We both tell the story, but I've been doing this, a little bit longer. So that you look at the stars, and stars are light years away, thousands of light years away. And I tell people when we're in the desert and there's no light pollution, you see the radiance of these stars. Those stars burned thousands of years ago. In reality, we're seeing light years. They burned when Abraham was walking through the same land, and how powerful that is. That's one reason why. The other is Ben Gurion. David Ben Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, one of the founders of the modern state of Israel, loved the Negev. And when he finished being prime minister, he actually joined a kibbutz in the Negev because he wanted to literally make the desert bloom. He saw all these populated areas and where people were concentrated. He said, we got to spread ourselves out. And that's why Ben Gurion University is down there. That's why, we make a pilgrimage. There's scientific experiments down there. It was that beauty of it. And he loved that. And there's great stories about his life and how as an older man in retirement, he went and worked on a kibbutz. They told him first they wouldn't accept him in the kibbutz. He was too old because he wouldn't be able to do the work. And he said, no. His first day in the work, he hurt his back. And then he was on a desk duty the rest of the time. But still, he lived that mission. And I love that. And every time I read new things about David Ben Gurion, I am newly inspired and renews that love of Israel and the importance of Zionism in my own heart.
So, as Rabbi shared, just like George, if I was going to choose a favorite place, it would be at my Savtas, at my grandmother who lives in Israel. My father was born and raised there, and so his whole side of the immediate family is still in Israel. So I always enjoy going and visiting them and spending time with them and catching up, and delicious dishes as well. Beyond that, though, as we were talking earlier, he asked me my favorite places as we were getting ready to start, and shockingly, I shared Jerusalem and the Negev. For similar reasons, but a little bit different. Not the same experience with Jerusalem, but I guess it is a little bit. But I remember times where I've worked with teens on the teen mission as well, and taking them, and we're standing at today what's known as the Davidson Center, which is the southern steps of the old temple. And the way that they're designed, it's just incredible architecture of thought that went into designing the second temple, where the steps as you go up, there's a short step and then a long step. So you can't just run up these steps as you're going. And what would happen is thousands of years ago, ancient Israelites would bring their sacrifices that they were going to hand to the priest in the temple that would then offer them up to God on their behalf. And so it was this idea that you had to do these things with intent. But to me, what was powerful in that moment is thinking that, as Rabbi was talking about Abraham being underneath those stars, that here, this is the place where our biblical ancestors once stood. That we know that. We can look at these stories. We can see in Torah and prophets and writings, and we see these examples of our ancestors. No, this is the place that they were standing in. And to have a story that has gone for thousands of years and that we still connect to, and that we can still see those same places and be in those same places and worship in those places and experience and play and do all those things, to me is pretty incredible. And I always love taking groups there for that reason, of being able to develop that connection. The negative, personally, I love hiking. And I think that as we look at our ancestors thousands of years ago, when our people were created as a nation, it was in the wilderness of Sinai. That we were created as a people, that we became an a nation. And I think I find the same thing as well when we go into the desert. Individually, just being able to see the beauty. You know, you ask people, what does the desert look like? Describe the colors that are there. And most people would say, oh, there's browns, different shades of brown, you've got the sandstone, you've got the sand, you're seeing different things. But if you look closely, you see a lot of green. And it's not filled with green, but there are plants that are always there that they don't need to have these big leaves to be able to soak up the sun because there's plenty of it for them. And the more time that you spend in the desert, and as you walk around and as you open your eyes, you just see this incredible beauty and see really how our world, how incredible it was, the beauty, what went into it, and into creating it. So those two, for those reasons, are some of my favorite places. But I would say that if I change the question a little bit, if there's a place that somebody was going to Israel and they had to see if they were going to visit, the Old City would absolutely be number one. But then I love taking groups to a place called Machon Ayalon, the Ayalon Institute. And it's on a kibbutz in a city called Rehovot, so just outside of Tel Aviv. And for me that's where I start to get into the Zionist idea of why Zionism and why it's important and pieces along with it. The Machon Institute is an underground munitions factory. Why underground? It was hidden. Nobody knew it was there. They started making munitions in 1945. It was the Haganah, the pre-Israel Defense Forces that were creating these bullets in this factory. And it was on a kibbutz, and most people who lived on that kibbutz had no idea that it was there. It was set up right next to a British camp, so that it was right under the eyes of the British, which would have forbid them from doing that. They did forbid them from doing that. They weren't supposed to have their own weapons. The Jews that were there in the Haganahs, they were creating arms to be able to one day know that they would need them. But there were certain people on the kibbutz that were aware of it, and they would every day go into the laundry, and it was underneath the laundry where this factory was. So some people, their spouses, had no idea that they were going underground and creating ammunition every day. And this went on for 3 years, and they would have to take the remnants of some of the things that they didn't need out, and they would dispense them all over the kibbutz, wearing them almost like in Shawshank Redemption, as you see. And remember, he was taking away the wall and putting his pants and kind of putting it in the yard as they went out. But you're on a kibbutz, spending your day underneath the ground. You're also missing out on that sun, and so they put tanning booths down there to make sure that people, it's as if you're outdoors. So they thought of all these incredible things, knowing what they're going to need eventually when the British leave, and being able to provide and defend themselves as well. And to me, it was that ingenuity, the incredible thought that went behind of when we're going to have a Jewish state, what we're going to need, and how do we get there today when we know that we're not allowed to do some of those things as well, as we did that. That's the sign for bathroom. So
good to know.
It's my son off to the side is asking. So to me, the Machon Ayalon, I always say, if you're going to Israel, it's an incredible place to see and just to understand the mindset of the early Zionists and what they were trying to create there.
It's funny, people always think like if there's one place, you have to go to the Kotel, and I feel at times being at the Western Wall, it's a little bit like Disney World, as the Orthodox control it and, almost make it unpleasant for us progressive Jews to go, right? And what they mandate. And so it takes away some of the sanctity of it, and it doesn't feel as spiritual as I hope it would be at times. Of course, I always bring groups there. I love going to Machane Yehuda, the outdoor market, right? Where in the hustle and the bustle and the craziness where you bargain for your grapes and you can get anything under the sun, and just insane. But there's this joy that happens there too that is remarkable, and it's the vibrancy of modern Israel in the midst where you feel like you're truly in the Middle East, right? And then you walk 2 blocks and you're in, the hustle bustle of stores that are like Europe, right? And it's just this amazing dichotomy that exists in Israel that I love too. It somehow blends together. That part of it is we could talk about it till we're blue in the face, but the reality is we want people to go to Israel to experience it, because and everyone who does leaves with a feeling of connection. And the question was asked, what does it mean to be a Zionist today? Which we asked that question. Someone, Flo Paterni, I think, threw that question to us. And, Zionism is a belief in or a love of the land of Zion and the eternal connection that the Jewish people have to that land, Zion being the biblical land of Israel. And so we feel that connection. We feel that importance and the value of that. For me, it doesn't mean to the exclusion of other peoples. A lot of people, Christians, Muslims, may feel a connection to Israel too. But as Jews, for us, there's a historical connection, and it's the birthplace of our faith as it is for others. And so we have that. And the value of Zionism is also our protection as well. That in a world that sometimes isn't always kind to Jews, we need Israel as our safety. We know if Israel existed before the Holocaust wouldn't have occurred. That Hitler put 900-something Jews on a boat called the St. Louis, and said they could go, and they pulled up to Cuba, and Cuba said no. They pulled up to Miami, pulled up to, the East Coast. All these countries said no. Great Britain said no. Pulled up to Israel or Palestine, the British turned them away. Greece, no one would let the Jews in, and St. Louis was brought back, and they were brought to camps in the Holocaust. If Israel existed when that boat was sent out to sail in 1939, they would have been able to be accepted and welcomed into their homeland. And so we still need that, because I have fears in our world today. I don't live in fear, but the reality of the German Jewish community in the late 1920s felt very well established and very well, assimilated and comfortable. So that's one essential need that Zionism exists in my heart, but also this spiritual connection means a great deal as well. Now, it's a conflicted challenge that we feel because there are problems in Israel. And I don't know, I'll let you speak to that first, and then I'll...
So I think it's a challenge because we define Zionism in different ways at different periods and depending on the community that you're in as well. As Rabbi was talking about, but the late 1800s, what was Zionism? It was defined as the belief in the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. Eventually, after the World Zionist Organization decided that's where we should go. And it was the idea of going and returning to the land which we had a connection with already. Over time, that's changed. Israel exists today. So though there are people that question its existence and would not want it to exist as a Jewish state there, I believe it's here to stay. So to be a Zionist doesn't mean the belief in the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine anymore. To me, what it is, I'll go there in a second. It just so happened this week that there was a podcast that the Shalom Hartman Institute put out on liberal Zionism and what it meant to be a Zionist today. And it resonated with what I believe as well in terms of what it means to be a Zionist today and what I'm looking for. And so there was a conversation that was happening between Yossi Klein Halevi and Rabbi Daniel Hartman of the Hartman Institute. And the conversation, as they were talking about things, they were defining for them what Zionism was today. And for them, it was the idea of creating justice. That a little bit of both of them for different things as well. They find it in different ways, but in a similar way that Zionism is all about creating this nation, this state that brings justice into our world, brings righteousness into our world, brings goodness into our world as well. And to me, that's what the Zionist enterprise is about today. It's about having this state where we say, Ki mitzion tetzei Torah, from out of Israel, from out of Zion comes Torah. So for us is this incredible place where we can go, we can rejuvenate ourselves, that ideas, Jewish thought, Jewish life, culture can be centered there, but that it can be everywhere else and brought out into the world. And I think we as Jews in the diaspora bring and affect that in Israel as well, and what Zionism today is connected to. But for me, it has to do with that connection of living the ideal values of our people, what we're taught, and that should come out in this society and the way that it's created and what should be seen there.
I would say what we hope for as well. Not always what's happening there, but
Correct.
what we hope for. I mean, that's, people ask, can we be critical of Israel? And in this context here, I'm comfortable being critical of Israel and being honest about that in a conversation because I'm in a safe place. I'm in a synagogue with people who care about Israel. When I'm called by the Free Press for a quote in the midst of, a skirmish that's occurred in Israel or, a conflict with Gaza and that's erupted, I'm going to be much more careful in the words and what I say about Israel, right? Because I believe, of course, Israel has a right to defend itself. And a lot of those words are laden with meaning and with mismeaning at times too. So that's a different thing. But here, yeah, just like I'm a proud American, but I'm very disappointed in American policies in our world right now and, over the past decade, things that have concerned me. I'm proud of Israel, but I'm very concerned about some of the policies of Israel and the building of more settlements. And I don't think that should be happening. So I jumped into a book written by an old friend of mine, Daniel Sokach, who's actually the executive director of the New Israel Fund, which is, right-wingers call him New Israel Fund left-wing. Left-wingers call him right-wing. So he's fairly moderate, New Israel Fund. And as an organization, it's a really balanced approach to it. Because can we talk about Israel, a guide for the curious, confused, and conflicted? And so I think it's a really balanced approach because he's honest about what happened in the creation of the state of Israel. When Israel became a state in 1948, there were Arabs who lived in a lot of these neighborhoods. And the fact that, Arab families, Arab individuals call the creation of the state of Israel the Nakba, the destruction, they're allowed to. I mean, they lost their villages, they lost their cities, they lost their homes. Now, a lot of them were encouraged by neighboring countries like Jordan and Egypt to leave their homes and that they would bring them back and they'd push the Jews into the sea. True. But it's still part of a history that we can be honest about. I don't think we should not talk about it because there's an emotional claim to a land. And if we're going to have peace, we have to have those conversations. So I'm not scared of those conversations, and I think it's important to talk about that. And when I take groups to Israel, we do talk about that. We often meet with Palestinians. Just as, I have a Palestinian friend who we've brought to meet with our high school kids here at Temple, who was the executive director of Access, right? Which is considered, it's sort of like the Arab Communities Federation, Jewish Federation, the Arab Community Center for Cultural and Educational Services, I think, is the acronym. And she is a Palestinian Muslim woman who was born in Fahim in Israel, right? And went to Israeli high schools and went to Hebrew University, and then was working. She got her master's at Hebrew University and was working here in the States on assignment as an accountant, and met a Lebanese gentleman and fell in love and stayed here. So she's a liberal-minded Israeli Arab, a Palestinian, and a Muslim, and can be friends with us, and we can have good, honest conversations and disagree with each other too. And I think that's important to do. And I'm probably going to be teaching a class around this book as well and sharing more about it. But it just came out a few weeks ago, and so but it's worthwhile, and I'd love to hear your questions about it too.
As Rabbi said, he went to camp and knew him, and so we're hoping to draw on that relationship one day. And Terry Elson mentioned that he was at the JCC Book Fair, and we're hoping he might come back and spend a little time with us at Temple Shir Shalom.
Yeah, I saw that, Terry, too, and because it was Zoom. But yeah, Daniel and I were counselors together back in the 80s. So great guy, and I'd love for you all to have a chance to meet him too. So, questions about things we've said, or about Israel in general, or things that are on your mind at this moment? Okay, Jonathan, your Tish question that might not be directly related.
Not directly to Israel. Can a Jew who is strictly kosher, who needs a heart transplant, accept the genetically modified
So the question is, if a Jew living in Israel needs an organ transplant, and he's an Orthodox Jew and strictly kosher, can he accept one from a non-kosher animal? Explicitly, in this case, a pig, as we saw, a heart transplant from a pig was put into a human this past week. And
Yes.
would that be allowed? Yeah, the rabbi said yes. We already have pig valves that are used right now. So the full heart was a miraculous thing that occurred this week that's not been done, regularly. But the valve has been done. And we have someone here at Temple who I remember when he was going to Cleveland Clinic, I won't reveal his identity at the moment, but the question was, would it be a bovine valve or a pig valve? And he wasn't sure at the time. And I said, yeah, whatever you can get is a valve, and that's great. You're not eating it, right? And so it would be allowed. I am sure there are some ultra-Orthodox who might say you couldn't, but
Not at the time. There are certain values, so that all the commandments, traditionally, 613 commandments that we have, they're each considered equal. So what food we would eat if you consume pork, which we are forbidden from eating, you'd break one of the commandments, traditionally. But there's a value of what's known as pikuach nefesh, of saving a life. And there are certain things that we're allowed to do in order to save a life. There are only 3 commandments that we're not allowed to break in order to save a life. So as Rabbi said, the prohibition is against eating pork. It's not about using it for implantation or transplant, for a transplant. And so as Reformed, Conservative, Orthodox have looked at it and tried to understand what's permissible and what's not. All 3 have said that it's permitted. Now, some will look at it in more traditional circles today, knowing that there's alternative options that they'll say it's preferable to have something else, but if that's the only valve that's available, then it's permitted.
Some of these new innovations, that's the beauty of Israel, right? And I know your question wasn't about Israel, but I want to bring it back to that, is the reality of the startup nation and what comes out of Israel that makes us so proud, and what Rabbi said about a land that promotes justice and the values that we love and are proud of as Jews. I mean, I've told the story before. My papa of blessed memory would read the newspaper, and any name there was a Jewish name, he's like, oh, he's one of ours, and he had such pride, right? Whether it was about Israel or about a businessman, or, and let's say it was some mumser who got arrested who's got a name like Sackler, and he goes, oh, he just Romanian, he's not Jewish, like something like that. Because we're embarrassed when we see a name like that. I just watched, Brian and I were talking about watching Dope Sick on Hulu with Michael Keaton, an amazing program on the opioid epidemic and the Sackler family. And if you read the book about the Sacklers that came out, it's really disheartening when you see a Jewish family behaving that way, right? That is such disregard for human life, and all about themselves and their own elevation and about money. So we hold Israel to a higher standard, because the Israeli military, you get a card of human rights that we Jews adhere to in the IDF, and they're supposed to keep that card with them at all times. Now, obviously, we know stories, horrendous stories, and that's not true for everyone. But I believe the vast majority understand that and appreciate that, and how important that is too. And so, those are the things that mean so much. And when I get so discouraged and disheartened when the Orthodox are making decisions that exclude us Reform Jews from the Kotel, or us being together, men and women at the Kotel, right? Or not allowing us to do a wedding, or our Reform college. We're not rabbis in Israel, we're rabbis in Michigan, but let's say our colleagues who are Israelis, who are Reform rabbis, ordained from our school, right? Who've grown up, spent their whole life, they're not recognized as rabbis to perform weddings necessarily, and the Orthodox and the government's prohibiting those things. That's disheartening. That's not the justice we seek from a place that we're so connected to.
But you talk about those values and the connection to heart in Israel, and we can turn to Brian Fishman, our executive director, and who's in the back with us and on the screen helping us out. His daughter just spent the last 6 months, 5-6 months in Israel at a nonprofit organization called Save a Child's Heart. And it was a nonprofit that was started in Israel to help kids who had heart issues. And there are kids that are brought in from all over the world that don't have the resources to be able to get the care that they need. And if they remained in the country that they were in, most of them would die from heart issues. And Save a Child's Heart brings those kids in, no cost. We'll bring in somebody, sometimes it's a family member, sometimes it's somebody else, that speaks the language and that will walk them through the entire process as they get a heart transplant or whatever surgery is needed for the kids as they're doing that. Overwhelming majority of the kids that are receiving them are from Gaza right now. But there are kids that are from all over Africa, kids that are from Asia that have
Syria,
from nations that Israel doesn't always have the best relationships with, or that
any relationship with.
or any.
I mean, they're covertly brought in with a wink and a nod because Israel doesn't have any that country doesn't acknowledge Israel exists.
And it doesn't charge these families a dime. They're taken care of, and it's a pretty incredible. And those kids will be in Israel for months as they have the procedure done, and then the recovery period and everything else before they go home and do that. To me, that speaks to the values, and that to me is what Israel is, that light into the nations and should be doing.
Did you guys see the CNN series on Jerusalem?
No, I saw it advertised. I saw bits of it, but I didn't watch the whole series. Yeah.
The question was, did we see the CNN, for those that are at home, the CNN documentary on Jerusalem, which neither of us have seen?
Yeah, there's so many stories that, like Rabbi shared with the Save a Heart Foundation, in the conflict in Syria, how soldiers were brought to the border with Israel and left there knowing the Israeli soldiers would then bring them to hospitals and get them care, right? And those are things that make us proud because of the values. Like, the Torah says that you see your enemy, or you see your enemy's ox that has fallen, you don't ignore that. You help that individual, you help that animal, right? And same thing, that no matter who it is, and those are the values of Judaism that make us most proud, right? And so we've got some huge things to resolve in Israel because both of us believe in the idea of a two-state solution. Of course, we would like to see a partner for peace on the other side, and Israel has to be able to protect itself and maintain its security. That's such a priority. But at the same time, we have a love of Israel because of family, because of our time there. And, I'm proud that my son lives in Israel now and might not come home, right? But the fact that he chose to go there after high school to begin college, when he was taking a year off to study Hebrew and Arabic in a program, take a gap year, and he was looking at going to Europe for a gap year, and all different kind of, and at first, there wasn't an option. And we had gone on one of our trips to Israel in December and came home and said, you know what, it feels comfortable. It feels like home. With everything else that's different in my life, this would be a nice foundation to have. And that's why he stayed now, and he's getting his bachelor's degree there and feels such a connection to it, right? And I think the idea that any Jew anywhere in the world can land in Israel and find some kind of connection is a remarkable thing. I remember being there when the Ethiopian immigrants were arriving in 1990, 91, and seeing, how Israel was absorbing in the absorption centers, what they were doing, and trying its best. Israel's got issues with racism, I'm not denying that, but trying to really help people enter this first world country who came from Ethiopia without running water, without toilets, right? What does that mean? And making itself available to do that. That's remarkable. There are a lot of things to read about Israel, a lot of things to help understand. So ask us, we'll give you titles. I'm going to teach a class about Israel. We have lots of trips to Israel on the calendar. I'm bringing adults to Israel March 28th through April 6th, right? It's not too late to sign up. It's going to be an intimate trip, and God willing, it's going to be a good time to go to Israel in 2.5 months. And so we're excited about that. Next trip after that
is May 9th through the 19th, and that is a birthright trip that I'll be staffing in partnership with our federation here in Detroit, and Israel Outdoors, which is one of the birthright trip providers, and that is a free trip for 18 to 26-year-olds who have not been to Israel since prior to 18. So they may have gone on teen mission with us or other things, but you can still sign up and be a part of that as well. And the only charge for that one is your lunch and getting to New York to be able to depart for the trip.
And so if you know people who haven't had that opportunity, tell them about this trip. It's a great opportunity. We're doing a part of the community. Then,
we're partnering in, both Rabbi and I at different times will be in Israel with our teens for our teen mission, which is a community partnership between the congregations in Metro Detroit, our federation, and Tamarack camps from June 20th to July 15th, seeing Israel over the course of a month and experiencing incredible partnership as well with our partnership region in northern Israel, where we have Israeli teens that will be with us on the bus the entire time, and a little bit of home hospitality is always a highlight. Kind of like my Safta's kitchen, they get to go into the kitchens as well. But a great way to experience Israel for the first time for our teens, or to return to Israel.
and then December 2022, probably December 23rd through January 3rd, I'll be leading a family mission to Israel, and that will be from families at Temple Shir Shalom, and along with my friends at Temple Israel, we'll probably have 3 buses between our 2 congregations doing this great trip together for those 10 days. And then March 12th through 20th will be the Motor City Mission, which will be a mega mission from our community, where we'll be celebrating Israel's 75th anniversary. And that will be every synagogue, well, every large synagogue is sending, a bus. So we'll have a Shir Shalom bus on that as well that I'll be a part of, and Rabbi might too, depending on our numbers. And it'll be a really wonderful celebration for Detroit Jewish community to be in Israel together. Those kind of trips the buses sort of run autonomously, so we have options and create our itinerary, but we're in Jerusalem all together with our 300, 400 friends from Detroit. And that's a cool feeling to all be able to celebrate Shabbat together and then do our own thing too. You see friends, we're at hotels together, that kind of stuff. We can't encourage you enough if you haven't had the opportunity to find a way to get to Israel and experience that together. One of our favorite melodies is Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold. As you look at Israel and you see the sun setting, not just the Dome of the Rock, the gold dome, but the radiance of the sun upon the white and gray limestone brings that hue to all of Israel. And so let's conclude our service as we listen to Cantor and sing with her.
Avir harim halum hayayim v'reach oranim nisa beruach ha'arbaim im kol pa'amonim uvtardemat ilan va'even shvuya b'chaloma העיר אשר בردד יושבת ובליבה חומה. Join me, ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, עלו לכל שירייך אני כינור. ירושלים של זהב ושל נחושת ושל אור, עלו לכל שירייך אני כינור. אני כינור.
As we conclude our services this evening, please rise. Thank you for your questions, your comments, for those online with us as well, and being a part of this nice conversation. Appreciate so many of you who lasted and stayed the whole time with us. Nice to see all the screens and those in person too. As I raise the Kiddush Cup, hey, a shout out to our very good friend, Dr. Guy Stern, who today celebrated his 100th birthday. And so send him a message. It's such a blessing that Dr. Stern is a part of our community and a part of the Detroit Jewish community. Such a scholar, such a mensch, such a blessing that he's in our lives. We join in the Kiddush.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen Adonai v'yishmerecha.
May God bless you. May God protect you.
Yair Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka.
May God shine upon you, and may God shine through you.
Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yisem lecha shalom.
May God always be a part of who we are as individuals, as a community, as a people. Most of all, may God bless us with shalom, with peace.
V'yisem lecha shalom.
Good Shabbos, everyone.
Good Shabbos.
And we're done. Okay.